Good afternoon, everyone. Tina Desiree Berg here doing the live show for Status Coup today. We're going to talk about a few things. At the top of the hour, though, I want to talk about some breaking news. Amazon is once again in the news, and of course, it's for something that's not good. We interviewed Chris Smalls, who has been a lead activist out of Staten Island on Amazon and work safety issues surrounding COVID. So I wanted to start the show playing a snippet of an interview that we did with Chris Smalls when he was here in Los Angeles heading up a protest at Jeff Bezos' Beverly Hills complex.
Tell people what you've been up to since Jordan spoke to you several months ago. The Congress of Essential Workers. Explain what that is, what you've been up to, how this movement has moved forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The Congress of Essential Workers, a collective of workers from Amazon and other corporations as well, decided to come together and form this alliance across the country, this coalition of workers and people that are just out here trying to fight for the movement. Our vision is to create a democracy for rank and file committee for workers, essential workers, to the point where they can negotiate their own contract, something like a union-like structure. You know, Amazon is anti-union. They do a lot of union busting, firing people, training managers to union salt and bust. So we got to make sure that we create our own our democracy and rank and file committee. So the Congress of Essential Workers vision is to get enough workers power where we can sit down at the table and be like, we're not going to work until you take care of the people.
Very cool. One question I have is, we have, so when we were in front of Jeff Bezos' mansion, we have a live view streaming pack, which pulls from all of the major cell phone networks. We all three, with the Status Coup crew, have different cell phone networks. As soon as we got in front of Jeff Bezos' mansion, everything went down. Yes. Absolutely everything. It seems like he had a scrambler. What is he afraid of?
Afraid of getting the truth out there. And that's exactly what we're talking about. He wants to keep the information from the public. He wants to silence me. He wants to silence this movement. He wants to silence his own workers. Some of these workers are still employed, to be honest with you. And he wants to silence them and still make money. So that is a prime example of how scary and how much power these people have. To shut off live stream, we're just trying to speak out and get some basic needs as humans. That's what it's about. So that right there should wake people up. It's time to fight back and join us.
Okay, you heard there from Chris Smalls, who organized this event and has done so much work since he was fired in the Staten Island office simply for trying to make his workers safe. He was a supervisor. COVID hit. He was noticing some extremely unsafe practices, so he spoke up. He organized. Then, all of a sudden, he was fired. Not only was he fired, but corporate, since Chris was getting the attention, they devised a PR campaign among corporate to smear him. This leaked to Vice. They called him unintelligent. They smeared him top to bottom, just basically saying, oh, he's a dummy. We can handle this with PR. But here we are today in Beverly Hills, far away from New York City. So this movement of his has gone national, and he's making, great headway. He's really waking people up, marching through Beverly Hills. People now have seen these signs. They're aware. They're going to see the news of exactly what is happening here. Some people will go back to sleep. They'll go in their mansion and not care. They'll be pissed off, like the one girl we saw in her car who was so inconvenienced for having to stop for 30 seconds for the protesters. But others will open their eyes. Others will see what's happening.
So the news this morning now is that Amazon is preemptively suing the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, because Letitia James wants to regulate the COVID pandemic safety protocols for Amazon. And also because she is not happy with the way Chris Smalls was treated, and has, in fact, I think her quote was that the termination was disgraceful. So basically this morning, Amazon filed a lawsuit. They're trying to block her from regulating the safety protocols. They accuse her of making demands that they claim have no connection to COVID. They further claim that her regulations have no connection to health and safety issues and have absolutely no factual or legal basis. So Chris Smalls, as we spoke with earlier and who was in the interview, who had led a protest at the Staten Island facility, he was fired after he temporarily demanded that they temporarily close the facility to clean it because there had been a COVID outbreak in the facility. So it's obvious, pretty obvious at this point to both Letitia James and to everybody else that's looking at this, that that's possibly retaliation for what he did, that he got fired. And then the weird twist about the whole story is that Amazon actually accused Chris Smalls of violating the COVID protocol safety mechanisms that they had in place. So part of the lawsuit also is that Amazon has filed an injunction, and they are asking a judge to prevent Letitia James from enforcing the things that she wants to enforce. So we're going to have to keep our eye on the story. It's breaking now. I'm sure that there will be developments in the next few days, and of course we will keep you posted on that. There's a second story that's coming out this morning that is just a wild story with all kinds of seedy aspects to it. It involves Biden, and it involves the press secretary and a White House comms aide. And I want to play a little clip about something Biden said recently in regards to the fact that he will fire anybody that is disrespectful.
We have an obligation, but we also have a great privilege. Very few times does an individual get an opportunity to do something that can fundamentally, positively impact on other people's lives, not only here but around the world. You're engaged in and you're working with the most decent government in the world. And we have to restore the soul of this country, and I'm counting on all of you to be part of that. But I'm not joking when I say this. If you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. On the spot. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody is entitled to be treated with decency and dignity. That's been missing in a big way the last 4 years. We have an obligation, but we also have a great privilege. Very few times does an individual get an opportunity to do something that can fundamentally, positively impact on other people's lives, not only here but around the world. You're engaged in and you're working with the most decent government in the world. And we have to restore the soul of this country, and I'm counting on all of you to be part of that. But I'm not joking when I say this.
Okay, so that was some strong words from Biden in regards to what he was willing to tolerate from his staff. So this morning we have reports coming out of a crazy story that involves a deputy press secretary named TJ Ducklow, his girlfriend, who is a reporter at Axios, and then another reporter that is at Politico. So let me try to dissect all the moving parts here. So basically, TJ Ducklow is in a relationship with the Axios reporter, and the person at Politico wanted to report on this because there's an obvious prima facie conflict of interest, right? Somebody should not be dating somebody in the press secretary's office if they are assigned to cover the White House as their beat. I think that's fairly obvious, right? So Tara Palmieri, believe is her name, is the person at Politico that wanted to report on this. They reached out for commentary, or actually her male colleague reached out for commentary from TJ Ducklow, and TJ Ducklow didn't call the male colleague back, but actually called up Tara and left incredibly misogynistic message, or I'm not sure if he spoke to her directly, but he said very misogynistic things to her. One of them was, "I will destroy you." Another was that she was jealous because his girlfriend at Axios wanted to fuck the same guy, and he only wanted to fuck her and not Tara. He also said that that she was jealous of their relationship. So incredibly unprofessional and very misogynistic in how it was played out. Then this morning, after this was reported on, Press Secretary Jen has basically come out and made a statement on Twitter in which she's saying that he has been put on 1 week suspension without pay, and that he sent a letter of apology to Tara. So crazy story. We'll see where that goes. But I think if Biden is going to stick to his original claim about not tolerating disrespect, this guy should definitely be fired because he way overstepped his bounds in the way he responded to the reporter's questions. And clearly the conflict of interest relationship was fair game to report on in all ways, shape, and form. So moving on from that, though, let's change gears. I have a very special guest with us today. I think this should be a very interesting conversation. I know a lot of you guys know about the anti-fascist movement. You've heard Antifa. Antifa's often been demonized in the press, not just the right-wing press, also the liberal press. And there's very few actual authentic reporters talking about who they are. So I went out of my way to find somebody that is associated with Antifa. He does research with them. So he's going to come on as my guest in a minute. But I also had the opportunity to interview Kitty Stryker yesterday. I'm going to play part of that interview. She is also a member of Antifa, and she is a journalist as well, and she reports on things for Teen Vogue. You've seen her work in Teen Vogue and a few other places. So let's open up this segment listening to the Kitty Stryker interview, and then we are going to bring my special guest on. So the origins of Antifa come from the 1930s. This was a group that loosely started to fight fascism in Europe, right? So you saw them fighting brown shirts in the streets of Nazi Germany before it was even really Nazi Germany, fighting against Mussolini, Spain, etc. What can you tell us about historical Antifa?
So I was doing a little bit of research on this. The term Antifa as a shortening of anti-fascist is something that came about in like the 1950s.
Okay.
And it was proposed that it be added to the dictionary then, but it wasn't in wide enough usage at the time. So I believe that there were some attempts to use Antifa, I should say, because the emphasis is important.
Right.
There were some folks that were trying to use that more. Then the right wing took it on, and interestingly took it on overwhelmingly after 9/11.
Right.
And I think, personally, I don't have any proof of this whatsoever, but my suspicion is that the reason why you saw anti-fascists being deemed Antifa with that specific emphasis is because it makes it sound foreign, and it makes it sound like a foreign terrorist group.
Yeah.
It sort of fits with this demonization, Islamophobia that we were seeing at that time. And so, yeah, I suspect that there is some subconscious influence to use Antifa because that emphasis sounds more Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
And I think that fed this inherent distrust that the right really wanted to encourage people in.
Yeah, and now it's just become adopted that way in modern parlance.
Yeah,
It's interesting you bring
honestly,
that up.
I like the way that sounds better, I have to admit.
Yeah, no, it does, because it
also,
sounds more like anti-fascist, right? Which is what it is.
Well, and I think if you were going to say anti-fascist, then it'd be like Antifa would be the emphasis, would be at the end. And so it's so interesting to me how language, just the way we use language, influences the way we think about things without even really noticing it. And that's another thing. Using the emphasis of Antifa pulls it away from it being short for anti-fascist. And I think that was very much on purpose.
Oh, 100%. And I've spoke with a lot of folks that are affiliated with the movement, especially in recent months as I've been covering protests. And the unification there is, again, we're against all forms of racism, all forms of white supremacy, all forms of fascism. That's the unifying principle, right? So it's odd that they became the boogeyman for all of these things, right? And it's not just the right that does this. I think to a certain extent, the media does as well. I've spoken to liberals that think they're bad guys, and it's like, why would you think that? Their main goal is simply to fight fascism in all of its forms. Why would you not be against fighting fascism? Fascism is bad, right? So, no, go ahead.
That's exactly it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just that simple. So it's been sort of weaponized in that sense, I think, and so which is why I think it's important to talk about it. Now, you self-identify as being part of this movement, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now you were there in Berkeley, I believe. What year was that again? The big one.
2017.
2017,
a little bit
right.
2016, mostly 2017.
So describe for the audience some of what you saw there in Berkeley. We had Proud Boys were definitely present. We had, the beginning, I would say the beginning of what could be called the Trump movement, because I don't think the Trump movement is solely about Trump. I think it's bigger than that, and I think it's something that's going to continue. So talk with us a little bit about some of the things you saw there in Berkeley in 2017.
Well, I mean, I had been protesting various right-wingers talking at UC Berkeley, which is kind of what began the battles for Berkeley, as they became called. And so I was there when Milo got protested and ended up leaving campus.
Right.
And what I saw was a bunch of people peacefully protesting, shouting a lot, certainly. For the most part, not getting provoked, but there were like right-wing citizen journalists, shall we say, who were out there trying to provoke people into fighting them on camera. And I saw that a few times, and you know, I was there as a medic, so I was trying to like encourage people not to take the bait, just for optics reasons, and also because like clearly that's what they wanted. And you know, I don't believe in caving into submissives demanding to be heard. I think that they need to earn it. So I feel like what you saw happening there was this desire to be made into a martyr.
Okay.
And then the police at some point started shooting like little pepper pellets to try to disperse the crowd. The crowd retaliated with a couple of fireworks being flung at the police, who were shooting at them, mind. I remember CNN reporting on that, like showing cops with guns pointed at the crowd and saying, "What is that? Is that some sort of weird long-range camera?" And I was just like, for fuck's sake.
No.
Like, are you kidding me? And so like that incident, what the media ended up saying about that was that anarchists, of course, it's always us, it's always the anarchists,
Right.
Anarchists, for no reason at all, just started shooting fireworks at the police and smashing windows of the student building, and setting a what was it, a light that had been set up on fire. The light caught on fire totally accidentally, to be honest. Like, that was not a purposeful thing. Windows got smashed after the cops were shooting at people. Because people got really angry. And also, you know, I think that you saw various right-wingers trying, like, pepper spraying people and then crying on film when they got pepper sprayed back or got hit in the face back or whatever. So you saw the beginning of this this sort of retelling of what was happening, where the cameras only went on after the first hit.
Okay.
So there was this tendency, and I mean, you know, Andy knows
Andy knows the worst. Was he there present in Berkeley?
I never ran into him, but it's his journalist technique.
Yes.
Journalism, you know.
He steals video too.
In quotations. But this method, this extremely effective method of only turning on the camera after you've attacked first. So that way, the only thing on camera is you getting attacked. You can say, "I don't know how this happened."
Right.
You know, and we've seen that used repeatedly. And the problem is that even after the footage is shown in its entirety, and we see, oh, no, that attack happened after they were already attacked. This was actually self-defense.
Right.
It doesn't matter. The media doesn't cover that. The media is no longer interested when it's like, oh, we goofed, you know, like, oh, it turns out that the guy who hit the right winger with the hammer was getting attacked with the hammer first.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter. And so, you know, I think I absolutely blame the liberal media for participating in that.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel very strongly that they have a lot of accountability for January 6th. They absolutely ignored anti-fascist activists for years and years. They demonized us. they regularly posted articles and think pieces about how aren't we the real terrorists? Aren't we the real fascists?
Right.
And then when the Capitol got stormed, they were like, where did all of this come from? And
Right.
I was just like, I don't even know.
Nah,
It
girl,
was
I'm
so-
with you.
It was so aggravating.
It is aggravating. As one of the few media persons that have. Okay, so that was Kitty Stryker talking about her personal experiences with, both a journalist and an Antifa member. You've seen her work in Teen Vogue. You've seen her in Vice. So she's a very accomplished writer and very authentic because she's experienced this firsthand. So I want to bring in my very special guest. Chad Loader he's a member of Antifa. He does research. He has done amazing work that he shares on his Twitter. But welcome, Chad. Let's talk about Antifa today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
100%. So you heard a little bit about what Kitty was talking about, and I'm wondering what parts you agree with, what parts you don't. As far as the history of Antifa, how it started in the 20s and the 30s as a movement fighting against Nazis, Mussolini, and all of the fascist moments that we were seeing at that time in Europe. Do you sort of agree with the way that we've come to the place we are today with Antifa historically, or would you add to what she had to say?
I would certainly add a few things. I agree overall. I do think that it's worth talking about what is fascism and how do we recognize it. Because if we don't define fascism, then we're not really going to be able to talk about what is anti-fascism. I think that when we use the word Antifa, it tends to emphasize the European roots of the European anti-fascist movement, and certainly if you think of Mussolini and Hitler and the Hungarian attempt at having a fascist coup, there's a lot of European work to draw on. But we have plenty of black anti-fascist history here in the United States. There's an offshoot of the KKK that was considered quite fascistic. If you think about George Jackson, famous black revolutionary. If you think about Kawasi Balagoon, who was a member of the Black Panthers, he was an anarchist. George Jackson was a socialist. These are black American anti-fascists,
Right.
who fought against the KKK and who fought against the military-industrial complex and fascism and the Vietnam War and all of these other things that were elements of fascism and still are today in that sort of white nationalistic, particularly American brand of it. So I think that it's useful to talk about Antifa, but I think that we tend to erase a lot of the work of the Black American anti-fascists, who really ought to be considered some of the original anti-fascists. And sometimes I think that their work is more relevant today to what we face in the United States because here we're fighting a specific American nationalistic brand of fascism.
Absolutely. And in fact, Chad, I can say from firsthand experience, I have seen lots of members of Black Bloc that are part of the African American community. That's not uncommon. Sure. And here in Los Angeles at the protests, there's definitely a large group that identifies as both members of BLM and Antifa. They see these things as being sort of combined in solidarity when fighting the police and the police brutality that we see. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think that in whatever city you go to, I think you're going to find members of Antifa and members of Black Lives Matter, solidarity movements, who pretty much mirror the percentage in the population at large, right? And so I think in cities that are mostly, I think if you think about Portland, certainly got a higher percentage of white people. You're going to find a higher percentage of white people in the movements, period. And in Los Angeles, which is a more diverse city, you're going to find lots of Latine and Black members of both Antifa and of Black Lives Matter, of course.
Right. So having said that, sometimes there's a picture that is painted that Antifa is mainly white leftists, and I don't think that's even remotely true from what I've seen. Who benefits from Antifa being painted that way?
I think it's a way to, well, first of all, I should say that there can be a tension between anti-fascist tactics and Antifa and Black Bloc tactics and other movements. And we should talk about that and we shouldn't gloss over that.
Okay.
So for example, you can have people who dress up in black and use what's called black bloc. So black bloc is a tactic that basically everyone dresses identically, all wears the same color. It allows people to protest. It allows people to punch Nazis without fear of, having Nazis show up at their home or having cops show up at their home. And
which are often the same group.
It's often the same group, right? If you see the top, if you look at who stormed the Capitol, the top three jobs of the people who are so far been arrested for storming the Capitol: number one, independent business owner; number two, real estate broker; number three, cop, right? And so there's a lot of overlap between white nationalists and the police. And so black bloc is a tactic that really got its start in Europe, in Greece specifically, and maybe in parts of Germany and France, where people just all dress identically. And it's also, I think it really is designed to intimidate a little bit too, to show that solidarity. But mostly it's designed to honestly keep people from experiencing, backlash and repression from the state and their Nazi friends.
Right, 100%. So let's talk a little bit about your personal experience or personal motivation. When you originally decided to become part of this movement, what were your reasons?
So, I think I've always been interested in, I research extremism, I research hate speech online, and I come at this from the point of view of a technologist who really talks about how do we have platforms that enable free speech at scale while also, preventing the growth of hate speech, harassment, things like that. How do you strike the right balance? And I think, my politics have always been fairly left-leaning, but I think, if you look at sort of 2017 and some of the stuff that started to happen once Trump started to normalize hate speech and to sort of promote that. I mean, I think it was in May, I believe, that you had the Portland train stabbing where a member of Patriot Prayer who was seen fighting leftists, at Patriot Prayer rallies, quote unquote, free speech rallies. That guy stabbed and murdered two people on a train in Portland because he was shouting, harassing women, shouting anti-Muslim statements, and he slit the throat of two guys. That was in May. And then in August in Charlottesville, Virginia, you had their Unite the Right rally, which was billed as a quote unquote free speech rally where another protester was murdered. And if you start looking at, the sort of history of right-wing fascist terrorism in this country, it's clear that, things really started to get much more serious. You had the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in 2018 that was committed, right-wing terrorism that killed 11 people, wounded 7 more. You had a shooting at a Kroger in Jeffersontown in 2018 that killed 2 people. Here in Southern California in 2018, you had the murder of Blaise Bernstein, a Jewish student by a white supremacist. That was in 2018. That was in Orange County. You had the Poway synagogue shooting that killed 1, I believe, and grievously wounded 3 others in 2019. And then the El Paso Walmart shooting in 2019 killed 23. He's a Trump supporter or a right-wing white nationalist terrorist. And even if you go all the way back to the Oklahoma City bombing, and what was that? I think that was 95.
About there.
People forget that he was a right-wing white supremacist who was into the Turner Diaries and all that other stuff. The famous school shooting in Colorado, I'm trying to remember the name of the city now, but that first famous school shooting, the students there, they were obsessed with Hitler.
Right. The one that Michael Moore did the documentary on.
Yeah,
Columbine?
That's right, Columbine.
Okay.
The one of the shooters was obsessed with Adolf Hitler and had swastikas drawn in his diary. So we have a long history of white supremacist stuff, and it really in 2017 is when I started to. I think my politics started to shift. We have to do everything we can to stop these people from committing more acts of violence, stop them from organizing, interdict their funding, and just literally do everything we can, including being out in the street and counter them. And, again, Southern California is a hotbed of white supremacy in the United States. I think people don't realize quite what our history is here. But, Glendale was the headquarters of the American Nazi Party. Their headquarters was right on Colorado Street in Glendale. In La Crescenta, the German Nazi Party would give rallies in the late 1930s. in Hindenburg Park of all places. And so, Southern California has a long history of this stuff, and so this is really just a continuation of that fight against white supremacy. And people think of California as this blue state. It's really mostly red areas with some very highly populated blue dots. I mean,
That's
we're
right.
the people who put, Nixon's from here. Reagan, was our governor. So it's a pretty right-wing state. And once you get outside of LA and San Francisco and a few other liberal enclaves, you're in white supremacist territory a lot of the time. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely true. I agree with you. So you brought up this conversation about free speech, right? And there's a carve out for incitement in our free speech laws for a reason. And I think a perfect example of this is what happened in Charlottesville the night before the big rally, where somebody was hit by the car, where the Bernie Sanders activist was hit by the car and killed.
Yep.
They were marching through the street with tiki torches and saying, "Jews will not replace us." That should have been an indication in that moment for the city to pull the permit for the march. Like, how is this not going to be incitement? And they were all armed. They were out there armed. So,
yeah, I think, when we talk about free speech laws, we should mention that the First Amendment talks about government restriction of speech.
Yeah.
It doesn't prohibit us from going and counter protesting people and trying to honestly,
absolutely.
frankly, as private citizens, shut them down in any way we can. I mean, if you think about George Lincoln Rockwell, right, the head of the American Nazi Party, he gave a speech at San Diego State University at the open air. I forget what it was called back at the time, the Greek theater at the time. It's the open air theater now. And Jewish activists came and literally punched him in the face and tried to shut his stuff down. So I think that we should talk about sort of what fascism is and how they use the values of a liberal democracy to grow. So first of all, fascism is not an ism. It's not a well-developed system in the sense that socialism is, or even capitalism, or classical liberalism, or communism. Those are all systems. They have system builders behind them, and theorists and books, and folks like Marx and so on. Fascism is really not so much a well-developed political theory as it is a set of techniques that are used to organize a right-wing dictatorship within a liberal democracy. And so fascism grows out of failing liberal democracies, right? And so the reason why fascism was able to get hold in Italy and Germany in I guess the sort of mid 20th century is because those were failing democracies. The Weimar Republic was a fairly new liberal democracy. They cynically use things like free speech as a way to sort of say, how can we grow a movement within this right under liberals' noses and eventually take power when it's too late, right? Yeah. And so everyone sort of says, hey, we want to support free speech. And I certainly think we have to be very, very careful about the government restricting people's free speech. But if a fascist, racist piece of crap gets their name put on the internet for saying racist stuff and they get fired from their job or their neighbors shun them, that's not a free speech concern from a First Amendment perspective. That is, in fact, free speech.
I agree.
Right? And that is, in fact, we choose not to associate with you. We choose to exercise our free speech to shame you for being a racist, violent piece of crap. And so I want to be careful when we say free speech to sort of talk about the difference between government shutting things down and sort of the rest of us exercising our free speech rights to go counter protest and to name and shame fascists when we find them.
Oh, absolutely. That is the apex of free speech as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, that sort of goes with this idea that the way you help free speech by adding more free speech most of the time, not taking it away.
Right.
Because your right to say what you want about these Nazis is guaranteed by them also having free speech, whether we like it or not. But I do think...
and by the way, burning a cross in someone's yard is not free speech.
That's what I was just going to say. But I do think that the exception is the incitement to hatred, which is there for a reason. When it goes too far, then obviously it's a problem. Now people are going to get murdered, right? So it's no longer... It's violence, right?
And we've seen that time and time again.
Oh, 100%. And I also agree with you on the liberal failing of governments, which is what gives me concern now, right? So neoliberal policies like privatization, not providing care for the majority of folks, like things like Medicare for all would be sorely needed. We need to address income inequality. All of these failings absolutely bolster fascist movements. There's no two ways about that. And we saw it in Nazi Germany, and we've seen it in the Trump era.
For sure. And if you think about some of the historic parallels, you had a massive war which destroyed a lot of the old world order in Europe. And so in interwar Europe, you also had Spanish flu, a massive pandemic, much more deadly than this pandemic. But, fascism tends to grow out of failed states, right? Because what fascism does is it sort of takes the failings of liberal or neoliberal governments and says, if we have a couple of minutes, I can kind of go into sort of some of the common characteristics of fascism. So fascism is sort of, again, the scholars have said the best way to understand fascism is not as a political system, but as an aesthetic. What's an aesthetic? An aesthetic is something that makes you feel something, whether that's music or art or fashion, right? An aesthetic makes you feel a certain way, and it doesn't have to make logical sense. And it doesn't have to hang together as a theory or as a system. And so fascism is best understood as an aesthetic. And you sort of see so let's not talk about what fascists believe. Let's talk about what they tend to do that's in common. And actually, I'll go back and say, we tend to use the word fascism to describe anything that we don't like. So, Antifa are the real fascists because they yell at us and they punch Nazis. That's not fascism. That's just
not
something
fascism.
Right? And in fact, you can have brutal authoritarian regimes on the left and on the right. So Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot were brutal authoritarian dictators on the left.
Right.
And they're sort of the left extremist version of authoritarian government. And then the right extremist is, Hitler, Mussolini, Hirohito a little bit.
Pinochet.
And so you can have authoritarian regimes in any part of the political spectrum, and they're all bad, right? Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao killed millions and millions of people. So and they're not fascists; they're left authoritarian dictators. So fascism tends to be right wing. It tends to be associated with a very patriotic, nationalist fervor, belief in the supremacy of the police and the military. And it's generally united under a charismatic ruler who's going to forcefully protect the nation from this idea of social decay, right? And saying all of these problems that you see of this failed government and the pandemic and people out of work, and if you think about, let's say Hitler coming into a failed Weimar Republic, in interwar Germany, he's going to say this is all caused by social decay, and we need to return the nation to this mythical pastime of greatness, where people were more patriotic and where we didn't let these demonized out groups, whoever's the enemy of the day, cause problems. And Hitler's first opponent was socialists. He blamed everything on socialists, right? And in the famous poem by Niemöller, which is first they came for the socialists, then they came for the trade unionists, then they came for the Jews, and then finally they came for the Catholics, and there was no one left to speak up, right? And so Hitler used these outgroups in the same way and talked about, he literally had a slogan called "Make Germany Great Again," right? There's this obsession with the idea of social decay. It's caused by enemies of the people who are Jews, communists, queers, socialists, immigrants, in the same way that Trump has used, Mexican. And if you remember the 2018 elections, he used remember all this thing about these migrant caravans from Honduras that were going to destroy the country, right? And it sort of stirred up all this hatred against them. Tucker Carlson goes on Fox News and he literally talks about the Roma people, causing problems in the U.S. So it's like hearkening back to using the word gypsy as a slur, that the Nazis did. And so there's always a vast conspiracy, or the big lie, right? These enemies of the people are involved in this vast conspiracy to weaken and subvert the nation, and we need to get back to being great again like we once were, even though that's this mythical past thing that never really was great, but it's sort of part of the fascist aesthetic. It's designed to make you feel that way. When people are at a rally being violent and they're chanting USA at the top of their lungs, they're not thinking logically. They're feeling a certain stirring of nationalism within them, right? And so that's the fascist aesthetic. And so the fascist leader always positions himself, and it's so far always been men, as the savior of the people, and only he can defeat this vast, insidious conspiracy against the people, return the nation to its mythical former glory. He's the only one who can drain the swamp and make the nation great again, but you have to give him all these extraordinary powers and just trust him to do everything. And, economic was caused by, let's say, neoliberal policies. Clinton outsourced a ton of jobs,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. NAFTA was a disaster.
Yeah, and Bush and Obama weren't really that great in their ways too. And so the leader, when things get bad enough, this fascist populist leader can come in and sort of say, only I can clean this up. There's a cult of personality around me, the person, my own physical self. Fascism also has in addition to this sort of obsession with this plot against the people and the vast conspiracy by these outgroups, fascism also tends to be associated with a contempt for weakness, and a reverence for a sort of macho traditionalism, right? And so, you'll see, you've been out at these rallies, you see what they chant at us, right? And they call us homophobic slurs. They're going to call us, pussies. They're going to, you Antifa pussies, right? You blue-beard, queer, and it's this sort of like.
And all the while they're wearing flags as capes.
Oh yeah, anytime now I think people see folks wearing flags and carrying American flags and screaming, it's a sign like that you need to be worried. Violence is sure to follow.
100%.
And so there's these sort of bombastic public displays, aggressive shows of manly strength and virtue. There are fascination with uniforms. So women get mocked, queers get mocked, disabled people get mocked, immigrants get mocked. They're subjugated. And fascism is sort of, and if you think about, the fasces, right, the Roman symbol of the branches all tied together to make a stronger thing. Fascism is obsessed with traditionalism, with heroism, with strength, things that are considered too modern or too intellectual. Those are sort of part of the vast conspiracy.
Right.
And fascism, tends to use liberal forms as an ideological shield, as we talked about, right? So Nazis were able to infiltrate, Nazis were able to infiltrate labor union organizing. They adopted the word socialist, right? So this is
That's right. I think that's an important part of the conversation, actually, Chad.
Yeah. Well, people say, "Oh, well, the Nazis were the socialists. It's in the name."
They were nationalists, but they adopted socialism as, it's like the important part of that conversation is they were nationalists, right? That is, they are the right, they're hard right. There's no two ways about this. But people often say, well, yeah, they're socialists in their name. Well, the Democratic...
What is the first line in the poem? First,
exactly.
Socialists, right? So
Exactly.
it's called syncretism, right? And what that means is like to take pieces from, labor unions, from the police, from the military, from your patriotic sort of ideal, things that are just whoever has the power in society that they can sort of co-opt, they're going to do that, right?
They're going to co-opt,
if you think about Italian syndicalism, which was sort of one of the roots of Mussolini, the Italian syndicates, those were basically labor unions, right? And he was able to get in there, and so they adopt the names and the forms of all these things. They adopt, the idea of free speech, and who could be against absolute free speech, right? I mean, gosh, and so this is a cynical way to sort of say, we're going to go ahead and build this fascist system right under your noses. If you think about the KKK, which you can think of as an early sort of proto-fascist movement in the US. In fact, Hitler really did write a lot about American concepts. He was really inspired by the concept of manifest destiny.
Right.
Hitler said, hey, America handled its indigenous population the right way, and we need to do the same thing with the Jews. We just need to wipe them out and exterminate them, right? And Hitler also was inspired by the KKK, which is a fascist movement that grew out of, the Reconstruction era Civil War. And you can think of the KKK as a proto-fascist movement, in fact, had proper fascist offshoots later in the 20th century. Because it was really about the KKK working hand in hand with the cops, right? That's why the cops and Klan go hand in hand, is a chant that we say.
Right.
And so the KKK would talk about family values. It would talk about making our communities safe. It would and
Right.
it's all cynical sort of nonsense, right? These aren't real beliefs that these people hold.
No.
So they tend to use tokenism as well to sort of paralyze white liberals who are sort of vulnerable to this stuff, right? Because I think white liberals who haven't really grappled with this stuff tend to be sensitive to issues of race and sexual orientation, but in a kind of uninformed, surface level way.
I agree.
And so, they'll say, oh, Andy Ngo is a gay Asian son of immigrants. How could he possibly be a fascist? Or the Proud Boys have a black guy, so checkmate, right? And it's like, yeah,
no,
we can have fascists.
It's not
we can
checkmate.
have fascists of all colors. And
no group is monolithic in its beliefs. Like, that assumption right there is so problematic, and we see that time and time and again.
it's problematic. And there's plenty of people who are fascists who are not white supremacists. They might be co-opted by white supremacists
Right.
and used by white supremacists. Do I think that Henry Theriault is a white supremacist? No, he's definitely a fascist, right? And so to the extent
Yeah.
that people buy into this macho, sort of like unity through strength, and we want to take control, and it's all these outsiders, and we got to, that are the enemy, and we need to unite
That's
and
right.
beat them up and dominate them. To the extent that people share those beliefs and values and they come into that, another perfect example is misogyny. People say, well, what does misogyny have to do with fascism? It's actually, if you look at Gamergate, right, and you should get Talia Lavin on here. She's great,
Oh,
but
yeah, I remember Gamergate.
if you remember Gamergate, that was the sort of a misogynist kind of
Very much.
on-ramp to fascism.
Yeah.
If you look at who was into Gamergate back in the day and who was really,
That's right.
many of those folks, whether that's Weave or these other folks, actually got on-roaded into white nationalism
They
and
did.
fascism through their hatred of
Yeah.
women.
Is a lot
so
of
if
the
you look
4chan people.
For sure. And so there, if you don't have to share all the beliefs, if you hate the right people, right, and if you're willing to engage in oppression and domination of the right people, then you can be a part of a fascist movement too, right? So we don't really fuck with that tokenism stuff. Like, I'm not going to sit here and call black people white supremacists. I'm going to say you're friends with white supremacists.
Right.
They use you,
That's
right?
right.
If you look at the Proud Boys, like there was a period, and I was really disappointed in the media's handling of this Proud Boy stuff back in sort of like August, September, October, back when
Yeah.
Antifa was being demonized. The Proud Boys, what would they do? They'd take their 3 black members, right? And they always put them on front in the cameras, right? And the media
Yeah.
just ate this stuff up. And it's like, literally.
Well, it's because none of them do any deep
while Henry
research.
Theriault is talking, giving interviews, right? These guys
Yeah.
are rampaging through the streets, burning, like vandalizing black churches, right? And so
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. No,
it's
it's
this tokenism thing. So
it's
anyway,
tokenism.
that's,
Yeah.
that's a bit of like where sort of fascism comes from. And, I think, even sort of Martin Luther King talked about sort of the danger of white liberals too, right? Because
100%.
people go, well, I mean, I don't support fascism, but, I don't think people should shut down free speech. And it's like every time these groups of people get together in enough numbers and they get enough money, they do
right.
shit like storm the Capitol, or they do shit like unite the right, right? And so we're trying to suffocate that movement at every chance that we get. And by the way, part of being an anti-fascist, like, people just think of like what shows above, if you think of like the iceberg analogy, and like what shows above the line is a bunch of people dressed in
Right.
black bloc punching Nazis, right? But actually not all anti-fascists wear black. Not all
Right.
the time, certainly.
That's true.
Right? And not all people who wear black are anti-fascists. And anti-fascists do a lot of work in their communities to actually help communities and to sort of extinguish the conditions that lead to fascism, right? To ameliorate the conditions, whether that's through the pandemic, whether that's through economic harm.
Mutual aid.
Anti-fascists are always out in their community doing things like educating folks. The Portland anti-fascists made like 30,000 bottles of hand sanitizer during the early days of the pandemic when hand sanitizer was really hard to come by.
Right.
Our organization, Mass Redux, we were able to distribute, PPE and masks and things like that to the Navajo Nation and to frontline healthcare workers. To me, that's all anti-fascism too, because it's saying, look, like we know the preconditions for fascism are failing liberal democracies. And so when things really start to fail and we're trying to shore that up with local grassroots, non-governmental organizing, that's anti-fascism too.
100%. So I want to circle back and actually discuss it a little bit more in depth, something that you mentioned earlier on, and that's the emotional aspect of fascism, that it's really not a political ideal, it's what did you call it, an aesthetic?
Yeah.
I think that's the best way I have ever heard fascism described. And one of the things that you notice is, and I've tried, because I've absolutely tried, as you know, to interview many of these individuals, because I think we do need to understand how they think. And it always deteriorates really rapidly, because if you ask them any sort of meaningful question about their beliefs, they don't really have a response.
Yeah. Yeah.
And meanwhile, I was going through, I've now watched, 800 of these Parler videos from January 6th. And one thing that I've noticed, as the emotion intensifies, right, there's absolutely a buildup to SPAS and Biggs and these guys, Geesewine. There's a buildup to these guys breaking in to the Senate chamber, right? There was a emotional buildup. And one of the things that is going on as they approach is they keep saying, as they're chanting, as you said, USA, 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 then they start imploring the cops to join them. You see plenty of videos where they're like, you are part of us, you're on our side.
Right. And then 5 minutes later, they're beating them.
5 minutes later, they're calling them traitors because the cops are not complying with that. They're not standing down.
Gouging their eyes out,
now they're fist fighting. And then, so there's this emotional buildup that was happening, and they kept saying, hold the line, right? So every time they got to a tier closer to getting inside the Capitol, you hear shouts of hold the line, meaning that do not give ground back to the cops. So this was definitely, I think this stuff needs to be shown. Obviously, YouTube won't have it on their site, but we'll find a way to get this information out there. But people need to see what happened that day. John Farina's footage that we saw in the tunnel was bad enough, but while he was filming that, there were all of these breaches going on, with Biggs smashing the windows with the police shield that he stole, and he's now under indictment, from the federal grand jury. So it would not surprise me, actually, and this has not been validated by the FBI as of yet, but we've seen multiple grand juries come out with conspiracy to commit charges that have been added since the arrest record.
Every political movement needs a civilian street gang, because civilian street gangs can do things that the cops are legally prohibited from doing, right? You cannot, as a police officer, go out in uniform and demonstrate and engage in political speech, right? Like, generally speaking, the citizens aren't cool with that, right? And if that starts happening, we start firing police chiefs. So they always need, you always need the cops and the KKK, right, to do this.
Right.
Or, so the brown shirts and the.
So let me ask you this, Chad. 3%ers, which we know a lot of cops are 3%ers. This is a right-wing militia movement. And in fact, the first time I think we ever saw them in the media was Michael Hari, who is the guy that bombed the mosque in the Midwest, and it turned out he was a member of not only a sheriff but a 3%er. So as you're talking about that relationship, how many of these guys do you think? I know we've uncovered a couple of sheriff's department members here in Los Angeles and Orange County that are Proud Boys, but how deep is it?
I think it's really seriously deep in both the military and the police, right? And first of all, the military and the police are in the U.S. really, organized systems of oftentimes racial oppression, domestically and internationally, right? And so they're tools of colonialism, they're tools of suppression. Modern policing grew out of the slave patrols.
That's right.
Right? And if you think about post 9/11, and it's interesting talking to people who are a bit younger who don't remember life in America pre 9/11, but there's a marked difference.
There is.
And I think the terrorist attacks on the U.S. and the way that we just wholeheartedly embraced militarized policing in the U.S., you started getting situations where the police, really for all intents and purposes in most American cities, are an occupying force, right? If you think about San Francisco, a minority of San Francisco police live in San Francisco or even in Alameda County, right? If you think about Portland, I think it's something like only 30% of Portland's police or fewer live in Portland, and their chief of police lives in Washington, right? And same thing with Los Angeles, right? So few of LAPD actually live in LA. And that's the definition of an occupying force. You now got people who don't live in the community, who did not grow up in the community, who are marching through the community in military gear, feeling like they're on the streets of Baghdad, but they're not subject to any kind of, not even a uniform code of military conduct the way the military is. They're pretty much unregulated and they can get away with anything they want. And that mentality tends to attract extremists. And I think post 9/11, you see a huge inflection point where things get much, much worse. And, the Oklahoma City bomber, he was ex-military, right? And I think you're gonna attract a lot of these types of extremist folks. And specifically, I think sheriffs, more so because of the way that sheriffs work in the U.S. You got with a lot of power, you got a lot of rogue sheriffs. I mean, if you think about the number one and number two, the sheriff and the undersheriff of LA County prior to Villanueva are both doing federal time right now for corruption and blocking an FBI investigation. So I think that you're going to find a huge number of I don't know that we're going to really reckon with it in any time soon, right? I think it's probably easier to deal with in the military. You know, the new SecDef ordered a complete military stand down. Stand down, by the way, doesn't mean like everyone stops doing everything. It means everyone in their command has to schedule time to think about this and talk to their command from sort of, you know, the battalion all the way down to the squad level, to make time for talking about white supremacy and anti-government extremism within the military. And so I think that the military is going to probably be able to grapple with this more easily, but it's a big problem. I think that if you think about all of the police departments across the U.S. and the sheer number of, you know, white supremacists and anti-government extremists that have I wouldn't even say infiltrated the police, that the police have been built on since the 1800s, you've got a much bigger problem, and we're only just now beginning to grapple with it. And, you know, I can tell you that I was arrested by LA Sheriff back in September for being part of a small group of people who were literally, all we're doing in broad daylight during the day, not part of the demonstration, we're cleaning up the munitions that LA Sheriff had littered the ground with in South LA, right? And
that was a bad week.
Unexploded pepper balls in kids' yards. So we were there sweeping that up and documenting what we found and say, hey, these are the chemical weapons and impact munitions. Here's the damage that they did, you know, interviewing the families. And the sheriffs did not want that, right? No. So they found a pretext to arrest me. They never actually, the DA dropped the charges, right? But literally while I was in that jail, waiting to get bailed out, they invited Elsa, a 3%er who
Elsa Aldiger?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a report on her.
Who's not even from that neighborhood. She's from a completely different part of Southern California. They invited her to
she attends church in
conference.
Chino, nowhere near there.
Nowhere near LA. And they invited her as a member of the community to talk about the unrest. And so you think about the fact that Alex Villanueva is friends with 3%ers and invites 3%ers to his conferences, his press conferences, to spin things about the protests against police brutality and to demonize Antifa and stuff. It's like, hey guys, we're just cleaning up munitions off the ground, right? And so it's a big problem. It's a big problem in LA. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and it's going to be difficult to grapple with that.
And in fact, I put a poll on my Twitter yesterday because I wanted to sort of highlight the reasons why defund the police is a good policy and not a slogan. So I guess I'll give out the answer now, which I haven't done on my Twitter yet because the poll is still open because nobody is getting the answer right. So basically I asked, what do you think the LA Sheriff's Department under sheriff's salary was in 2019? That's the question, right? So the options I gave were 300,000, 150,000, 700,000, and something else. I can't remember what the other one was. But everybody's picking 300 and 150,000. Well, the answer, folks, is 700,000. That is the answer. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but she was paid $700,000 in 2019.
Yeah, it's wild to understand. I exposed an LAPD captain, Richard Stabile, as being a follower of the violent QAnon group that was involved in storming the Capitol. And you know, he's liked tweets that suggested sending armed gangs after the new DA, after Gascon. And so this is a violent, dangerous individual. Who's an LAPD captain. He makes over $300,000 a year as a captain, right?
And he's in the downtown LA area. I also have video of him where he basically fessed up to pre-arresting people because they looked like Antifa. I couldn't believe he said this on camera. I was like, wow, thought crimes now. Is that where we're at, LAPD?
Yeah, we're doing pre-crime. Yeah, it's wild. And so it's, you know, as long as politicians continue to look at police as having been infiltrated by extremists, as opposed to being built on extremism and constructed fundamentally as an extremist force, as an occupying force in many American cities, we're not going to really be able to grapple with this because it's that few bad apples argument once again, as opposed to saying, okay, how do these people have so much control that, you know, the LA County Board of Supervisors voted to start investigating and you know, really looking at how much money we're spending on these sheriffs and sort of what their pattern and practice of policing has been. And Villanueva was able to say, like, wait, I want to meet with each of you Board of Supervisors folks privately to discuss this one at a time, right? What kind of stuff do you suppose is being discussed in those meetings? Could it be like maybe, hey, you've got a cousin who's jammed up in county. Do you want their life to be easier? Do you want their life to be...
Quid pro quo, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild, right? And
it's wild.
The corruption is out of control.
It is. It is, and in fact, if anybody has any particular interest in this subject, I actually interviewed Alex Villanueva while he was running for office back in 2015, and he was running, believe it or not, as a Bernie Sanders supporter, as a Bernie-crat. So it's wild to listen to that and then to see where he is today, because these are not the same folks. But it's still up on my podcast from years ago if somebody wants to go back and listen to that. So I want to talk about Andy Ngo for a minute, and I want to talk about Jack Posevich, because these guys have sort of made a name against Antifa. Like, it's like the media industrial complex that bags on Antifa, and that's their brand. That's where they make money. But nothing they do is really a commitment to veracity. It's not authentic. They always take videos. They edit them to look a certain way. In fact, I think you came in on a Twitter argument I had with Jack Posevich where he had done exactly that. And I was trying to tell him that's not the whole video. You know it. Here's what happened before that. And, you know, he just kept trolling me with Cassandra Fairbanks. But this is their brand, right? This is what they do. They want to paint Antifa a certain way. And the unfortunate reality is that they've been somewhat successful in this. So,
you know, first of all, Jack Posevich is a Nazi,
He is a literal Nazi. He has 1488. You know, and just in case, I've explained to folks before, but in case you haven't heard this before, 1488 is a neo-Nazi slogan. The 14 words are about having white children and white genocide, and the 88 is a reference to Heil Hitler. So, and Jack Posevich has posted that on his Twitter.
And his wife.
More than once.
He hangs out with Eli Mosley and Richard Spencer, right? Two of the most prominent American neo-Nazis, right? So we can say that Jack Posevich is a Nazi, right? And I don't use that word lightly. Andy Ngo is a different story. He's a right-wing fascist grifter, right? And I think that the grift is really important to these folks too, and we should talk about that, because I think it's also true of folks like Biggs, right? That if you look at there are organizations who actually work to get white supremacists out of the movement, right? And to work with folks to say, look, you want to leave this stuff behind, but it's tough, right? You got these tattoos you need covered up. You need counseling. You need a job. You need someone who's willing to hire an ex-Nazi who might still have Nazi tattoos. And a lot of these folks, they're in the movement because they were brought up in the movement and because the movement pays them, right? And a lot of these guys, it's like, hey, my buddy's a Nazi too. He runs a flooring business. You know, he gets you in, right? He's a good guy. And so a lot of these folks like have trouble leaving the movement. I think this cult of personality that has surrounded Trump, right? And you can see this in LA. All of these people are trying to become minor celebrities. And I think Andy Ngo is kind of in that same category, right? Of people who he made up a fake story about a brain injury, right? And raised something like $300,000 or $200,000 off of it, right? And so the grift is really huge for these people. And if you look at these clowns that are in LA who have really spent the last 6 years building a MAGA brand, being the token, you know, black MAGA guy. And then ultimately you see these people rioting at the Capitol, right? And you kind of go, okay, so how did they get the money to go there? Well, the thing is, these people establish these little brands, the movement ends up paying them, you know, and honestly, you go to Trump rallies a lot of the time and there's so much commercialism happening. Like, you go to a Black Lives Matter rally and there's people bring snacks, you know, people bring water, it's for free, it's for the community. If you go to the Trump rallies in Beverly Hills, I mean, people are setting up selling water for $2 a bottle. I mean, the grift and the sort of trying to create yourself as a minor celebrity is a huge part of Trumpism. And I think with what we're seeing is the collapse of Trump as a brand. I think he's no longer useful to the movement. And I think that ultimately he's lost his social media status. He no longer has the power to pardon anybody, right? He's under investigation now, and all these state attorneys general can go get him for all the corruption that he's had with, you know, Russian mafia over the years. So like, he's not useful anymore to the movement. And I think that the folks who really spent the last 4 or 5 years building personal brands around their, you know, MAGA personalities, and you've been to Beverly Hills, you've seen all these kooks. Right?
Yeah, my favorite, Chad, is the guy that was selling homemade Botox, and I know everybody in the audience is going to be like, what did she just say? Yes.
They're going to, and you know, it's interesting because you you sort of, everyone there is like, oh, I'm going to run for office. I'm going
Right.
to become famous. I'm going to be on the speaking circuit. Now, like the whole cult of personality is starting to collapse and it's demoralizing these people. But where are they going to go now, right? They've moved into anti-vax as their new thing, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of the same people who on January 6th were committing violent acts in LA or in DC on behalf of Trump, you see them a few weeks later at Dodger Stadium, shutting down the largest vaccination site in the U.S. or one of the largest. So, these people are going to continue to find common cause, but we've got to find a way to get them out of the extremist side of the movement. And by the way, like there's this idea that we hate MAGA people. I don't care who people vote for at the end of the day, right? Republican, Democrat, people think that, oh, Biden and Antifa are like,
No, they're not.
Anti-fascists can't stand Biden, right? The author of
Yeah.
the 1994 crime bill, he's like the lesser of two evils.
That's right.
We don't rely on the state for much. We don't expect that the government's going to do much for people, right? Because when has it really, right? So is he a big improvement over Trump? Yeah, he's undoing a lot of the damage that Trump did. Is he Antifa's hero? No, they can't stand the guy, right?
Yeah, that's
So,
true. And in fact, my favorite thing when there's counter protests with you folks is when they start to turn to Biden, like fuck Biden, whatever, and then the Antifa guys say in response, yeah, fuck Trump and fuck Biden too, right?
Yeah, and they're stunned. They don't know. They think
They're
that we're out
stunned.
there
It's so
because we're Trump
funny. The Trump
supporters.
people are like, wait.
Yeah, so it's so interesting, right? Because like I do believe that there can be and there has to be dialogue, right? And I don't mean being buddy with people, right? But you got people's at multiple levels of the spectrum on their extremism. And I think for people who haven't committed to violent extremism, you got to be able to talk to them. And I don't mean being buddy, and I don't mean photo ops with fist bumps or inviting them into spaces where they can do harm. But I do mean debating them, right? And saying, look, we'll debate. And by the way, if you want to clown around and you want to throw hands, we'll do what we have to do too, right? So don't mistake our invitation to talk as a sign of weakness, because if you want to attack people, we will absolutely do everything physically to stop you from doing that. But we got to be able to dialogue. We have to, because I don't see how we get out of this without taking
I
the
don't
sort
either.
of like people who are on the starter kit for extremism and get them off that on-ramp before it's too late, right? And so I think that we've got to be able to sort of have dialogue with folks who are maybe on the fringes of these movements who are like vulnerable to being recruited. And that's the same reason, and so I think like we can be out there and have constructive debate, but if there's people who have known violent histories, then, they're going to get pushed out of these spaces as they should be.
Yeah, I think, Chad, you're making a really important point right now about how folks get sucked into these movements, and I would include QAnon in that. And we're at a point now where we need to find a way to deprogram these folks. They've been so radicalized, and very few of them, I think, are aware of how radicalized they are. When you try to talk to, at least I know in my experience, when I try to talk to them, they're so far in crazy land, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I just think that's what it is. The things that they believe to be true are crazy, but they really believe them, right? And they're very committed to the belief in them, and they're very much willing to act on those beliefs, which is why I think we saw what happened on January 6th. I think there was a really clear path to that buildup. It didn't come out of thin air, right?
No, it's and if anyone is surprised by what happened on January 6th, they weren't paying attention, right? I mean, because we've all been in the streets and we've been literally physically attacked by some of the same exact people who attacked the Capitol, right? And so we saw it coming, right? And I think Black people have seen this coming probably more so than white liberals, right? If you talk to Black people really across the political spectrum, like a lot of them are like, look, we're no fans of Biden, whatever, right? Just another white freaking Democrat politician. But talk to Black people in Georgia about fascism. I mean, they lived under voter suppression for so long. People thought Georgia was a red state when it wasn't, right? Because so many votes were suppressed. And the moment we get rid of voter suppression, Georgia turns blue. I expect that that's true of a lot of states in the South. And I expect that the GOP knows that. And I expect that they're doing everything they can to sort of put us back and put all those Jim Crow era laws back. And that's a form of, right-wing authoritarianism as well. And we've got, I think that these movements, like, I don't know about deprogram. I think you have to provide alternative sources of information that can be trusted, right? Because people's minds have been so poisoned by the algorithms. And so, like, if you look at Twitter, if you look at Facebook, if you look at TikTok, YouTube, right? And all
even
these, like,
Google search function.
Google search, right? the whole thing is designed around what's going to drive engagement. They don't care if it's good or bad. They want as many people using their platform for as many hours a day as they possibly can, and they scientifically do A/B comparisons, and they study how do I trigger the most dopamine, the most base sort of like mammalian response here that I can, or even like to the lizard brain, it's outrage, it's making bold statements that are wild, right? And it's like YouTube just wants to sell ads, right? And they want people watching as many YouTube videos as they can, for as much time of the day as they can. I mean, even Netflix, it's a separate thing, but Netflix said we don't have competitors. Our main competitor is sleep, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, if you think about the way that these algorithms are designed, they're designed to it's like a massive dopamine farm, and we're all sitting in the dopamine plantation, clicking, scrolling, quote tweeting, whether we're outraged at something or whether we're happy or we agree with something. They don't care. As long as it's people using the app, then it's more eyeballs on ads, which makes more money for them.
Right.
And they're going to do everything they can with these platforms to drive engagement. And engagement, it doesn't matter to them if it's healthy engagement, if it radicalizes people or not. They just want that to happen so that they can sell more ads. And I think the modern information environment is a huge part of that problem. And these for-profit companies that are driving a lot of how people get information today via the algorithm, and like, you don't get to decide what Facebook or YouTube shows you. They get to decide that, right? And that's totally up to them. And so we have to really, I think, grapple with that and say, is that healthy? Is these for-profit companies? Yeah. And by the way, the old system was bad too, right? These centralized sources of information. I mean, that's how you get things like the truth about the Vietnam War not coming out for decades, right?
Exactly.
And so we can't go back to the old system. So like the old gods have died. We don't have new gods to replace them. We're in this sort of mishmash of things where private, tech companies are eating up all this stuff and doing harm. And so we can sort of start with that, right? And by the way, the right wing's not a huge fan of this stuff either, right? For different reasons. They think they're being censored. And
right,
so,
right. Often you're right. I often see, even when I'm on Telegram, scrolling through some of the right-wing pages, they often are able to pinpoint the same problems as what the left sees, right? They'll complain about income inequality. They'll complain about big tech, like same problems. Their solutions are what are the scary thing. Let me ask you this, Chad.
And by the way, like, if you just real quick on the back to blue stuff, right? Like, Blue Lives Matter never meant real support for the police, right?
No, it didn't.
It meant Blue Lives Matter was a way of saying Black lives don't matter.
That's right.
Because it came out as a direct response to Black Lives Matter. And it's just a way of saying, and as soon as the cops, whether that's in Beverly Hills or LA, as soon as the cops show any kind of saying, hey guys, you need to go home, or you can't come into the Capitol, what do? They freak out and they start staring at the cops and beating and killing cops, right? And so Blue Lives Matter lasted all of like a few months, right? And it was just, hey, while we're temporarily aligned with you and you cops are beating up the people that we want you to beat up, you're our best friends. As soon as we don't get our way, that Blue Lives Matter shit goes right out the window and to literally killing cops, right? And so we saw through that stuff, right? And so I'm sorry, that was just sort of an aside. Because
no, I'm glad you said that you're 100% correct on that. Blue Lives Matter was absolutely a racist response to Black Lives Matter, and it had nothing more. I mean, we see that now, especially now that the cops have, and the FBI, the DOJ, like now that there are serious charges coming into the Proud Boys and 3%ers. Yeah, cops, what? And even some of them that are being arrested or being brought in for questioning are part of law enforcement in some capacity or military.
Yeah.
They're calling their brothers in arms traitors. It's kind of a wild thing to watch. But I want to go back to the tech thing for 1 second and ask you a question, because I know you also work in tech and have a tech brain. So, Bayesian models sort of, I know Google search, spam filters are a good example of that, I suppose. But I think the thing that they do that could be really deadly is they feed you stories that you're going to like, right? They intentionally want to give you more of what you already liked in the past. Like if you like a story on...
Yeah.
So now you're putting yourself into this like really tiny tunnel where you're only getting one point of view. And it's that this one point of view is just repeatedly being enforced again and again and again,
it's a process of distillation, right? And so it's like if you take salt water and you boil some and you concentrate it and you concentrate it and you concentrate it, right? It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And so like, they say, oh, well, we're not suggesting anything to the user. We're just, they call it revealed preference, right? We're revealing the user's preference that they already have, but it's not true, right? And And it's a total cop out because
Yeah.
if the person says, hey, you know what, I really want to go to the gym today, right? I want to go to the gym. I want to be healthy. It's New Year's, da, 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 right? And then they just get shown an advertisement for donuts, and then they end up staying home and eating donuts instead of going to the gym, right? Because they got shown an ad for donuts at a moment when they were about to go to the gym and they would have otherwise gone to the gym. The platforms will say, oh, well, we just we revealed the user's preference for donuts instead of the gym, right? And like, wait a second, you suggested that to them. And the fact that they bid on it, right, doesn't absolve you of responsibility for suggesting that content in the first place. And people will show you, like, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And that's the same thing with these platforms is they don't care whether you like it or not. They just care whether you keep watching it.
Yeah.
Right?
All right. So they,
Ultimately,
okay, I see what you're
if you
saying.
watch enough of this stuff, right, you're going to get, and there's, there's so many documentaries now about people who've lost their grandparents to QAnon. I mean, if you look at really, frankly, I mean, I think that, the fact that you had the commander-in-chief of the United States spouting, he got elected on conspiracy theories, right? On the sort of birther conspiracy stuff, that Obama was a closet Muslim that was born over, like all of this crazy stuff. Guy's born in Hawaii, right? But that's how he got elected. And I think that, the platforms have a huge role in this because with the news media, if you watch the 11 p.m. news, everyone sees the same segment, right? You all watch the same news. And so, yeah, you have choice. You can watch CNN or Fox or whatever. But if you watch Fox, you get Fox. If you watch CNN, you get CNN, and everyone gets the same thing. If you look at Facebook ads and how they are targeted to people, you can target ads to people in a way that's going to say, I'm going to micro-target these ads to these people at the specific time of day when they're frustrated, they've been sitting in traffic, right? And I'm going to target this ad to this group of people and tell them that these people over here are their enemy. And then I'm going to do the same thing and target ads to the opposite group of people and say that those other people are your enemy. You could literally, with Facebook ads, spark a genocide, right? And if you look at what happened with Facebook in Myanmar a few years ago.
That's what happened in a way.
Blood in the streets, right? And if you look at how Russian, the Russian GRU was able to use Facebook ads to literally say, create a fake rally, a fake like Antifa rally or whatever it was. They created a fake rally to get patriots to come, quote unquote patriots to come, and then they're trying to cause blood in the streets, right? And you can do that because you can micro target. These things track all this information about you, and they can micro target you to these characteristics that they've learned. And it's quite scary how detailed this stuff can get, right? And you can target things to folks who are likely to already believe in QAnon.
Right. And it just keeps getting reinforced.
And it's hugely profitable for Facebook, right? Like they make so much money off of these Second Amendment ads and all these other things. Gun rights are another on-ramp to violent extremism. And by the way, like another thing that the right is often surprised by is Antifa is very, very pro-Second Amendment. We're very pro-gun. Right?
Yeah, that's always.
Like people are like, you're trying to take away our gun rights. Like, hell no.
Like, no, we're not. We're your worst nightmare. We're leftists and we're armed.
Yeah, go look at like where the phrase "under no pretext" comes from. Right, that's communism. Like they're like, no, keep people's guns. So, but it's frightening. Like if you think about the fact that these systems learn so much about you, and this is what's called the surveillance state. That I think a young woman was outed. I think that the pharmacy somehow knew that she was pregnant from her purchase history, and so they mailed maternity and pregnancy like advertisements and pamphlets to her house where like her dad saw them or something like that, right? So I mean, these systems are they're shocking, and like there's a whole other episode that we can do
they're very
on
invasive.
The surveillance state, right? But again, that's another scary aspect of fascism, and like we're no fans of these platforms either. We use them as we must, right? But I think the way that they serve information to people and the way that the algorithms just get to decide what each individual sees based on that individual's history and where they are in that ramp and that onboard into spending all their days on YouTube, which is the perfect YouTube customer, right? As someone who just watches video after video after video all day. That stuff's scary. And I think that, if you look at, we talked about how sort of crises tend to contribute to fascism, something like people being out of work, and having, if you think about maybe elderly people, retired people who have nothing to do now, that the lockdowns are happening and that there's these austerity policies. Like,
Right.
they're sitting on Facebook all the time. And, you know, it used to be the guys on Facebook and typing in all caps about, God damn it, you know, America's just not what it used to be. And the wife screaming, get off the damn computer, right? Like, but they're both on the computer because the bridge game's canceled and they have nowhere to go. And like,
Yeah.
it's bad news. And so when these things tend to hit at the same time, I think it really causes huge problems.
No, yeah. All joking aside, I don't disagree with you. I want to ask folks in the chat room if they have questions for you. I will write them down. I'm going to ask you another question in the meantime, but I want people to go ahead and type in your questions. I know this is your chance to ask somebody that's an Antifa researcher questions about Antifa. I want to ask you this. What are your main goals as part of this movement? I know we've talked about shutting down fascism. I know we've talked about reaching people and maybe getting them to not onboard into right-wing movements.
Yeah.
And I think because, you know, the last 4 years we've seen under Trump an escalation in growth.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's indisputably true. But what are some of the things... All right, let me say it this way. We got to Trump for a reason, and I think we've kind of touched on that. Yeah. And even though we have this escalation that we've been dealing with over the last 4 years, I think we haven't gotten to the root of the problem yet. I think the root of the problem still exists, and that we could have somebody worse than Trump come along at some point. So what are Antifa's main goals in the sense that how do we prevent somebody like Trump happening again? What can be done about that? Are there things that you folks work on in that capacity that you think are effective?
For sure. I think that the first thing to note is that anti-fascists are just regular people, right? And the research shows that when fascists stop organizing fascist rallies in their town, anti-fascists go back to their regular lives and go back to doing what they do, which is just raising families and, you know, trying to survive in this capitalistic society and having fun and dating and all that other stuff. So that's the first thing is that like, anti-fascists mobilize in response to fascism, right? And that's it. The other thing is that anti-fascists don't really care about what thoughts people have in their own head. I don't care what people's political beliefs are. I care when you start gathering in rallies and start being violent towards people, right? Like if you look at that poor woman, Berlinda Nebo, who was attacked in downtown LA, they called her
that is one of the most horrific things I've ever personally witnessed, I can say without equivocation. That was a hate crime.
Absolutely horrifying. And this is the kind of thing that anti-fascists mobilize against because she was walking home from the store. She lived in the neighborhood. She was walking by a rally. She started getting harassed. They got in an argument. They surrounded her. They ripped her wig off. They pepper sprayed her and punched her and called her racist slurs. And this is why we organize, right? And this is why we care about these rallies because we don't always counter protest, right? Because sometimes it calls more attention to these rallies than they deserve, but we do want to make sure that if they're going to come to people's neighborhoods and be dangerous there, that we're there to protect the neighborhood. You know, so that's the first thing about anti-fascists. In terms of the other stuff, you know, the long-term goals. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a 400 plus year project on, you know, colonialism and racial inequality that we have to come to grips with as a country. And that's not going to be just anti-fascists doing that. That's really going to be everybody. I do think that people need to read more about Black American anti-fascism, read about George Jackson, right? And read his work. Read Kouassi Balagoon, who's a member of the Black Panthers out of New York, right? Who is one of the people that broke Assata Shakur out of prison, right? Like, there's a real deep American, specifically Black American tradition of anti-fascism that is super inspiring, and it's also super lefty, right? And that tends to get erased, the fact that, you know, a lot of the Black Panthers were socialists and communists and anarchists. And so I would say that people need to start there, but there's a long conversation, a long project that, you know, defunding the police is part of it, getting money out of politics is part of it, restoring voter rights. Like, there are some people who are anarchists, and I know my belief is anarchist organizing tends to be more effective. Hierarchical things tend to lead to abuse of power, and so my beliefs tend towards anarchism. But the reason why most of us are like upset about what happened at the Capitol isn't because we love these politicians. It's because democracy is not bad, right? As long as it works for everybody. We want more democracy, not less. We certainly don't want Trump installed as a dictator for life. And so people are
Right.
like, oh, well, now that we actually had a real attempt at a revolution in this country, we see who's a real revolutionist or not. Like, no, dude, we don't support. We agree with many of the problems that you've identified in terms of the economy, in terms of corruption at all levels of government, right? What we don't agree with is your solution for installing Trump as a dictator for life. We're not down with that, right? We're
Right.
going to oppose you by any means necessary if that's your solution, right? But if people want to come together and talk about eliminating white supremacy, defunding the police, getting money out of politics, dealing with corruption in a real way, like handling these platforms, we're all about that.
Right.
You know?
Right. All right. So first thing I want to address is somebody actually made a point that I think I need to clarify, and maybe you want to chime in on this. They find the term Antifa researcher to be misleading. This is somebody that actually follows you on Twitter, and I really think everybody should follow you on Twitter. Your Twitter is amazing. But the reason I'm saying researcher is because Antifa does this amazing job at researching right-wing movements, knowing where they're coming from, knowing who's involved with them. And I think that cannot be discounted. I think that's one of the most important things that I have seen Antifa, members of the Antifa movement engage in. And you're very good at that. I don't know if you want to talk about this publicly or not, but do you have anything you would add to that?
Research is certainly part of it, right? Which is, hey, my friends got attacked and stomped and bear maced, and Berlinda got attacked, and that pisses me the fuck off. And I'm going to find the people who did it, and I'm going to name and shame them. I don't believe in working with the police. I don't get along with the cops. They don't like me because I expose their asses too, right? So I don't talk to police ever, right? But what I do is if I find out who beat up my friends,
right,
sure, I'm going to put their name on blast on Twitter so that their neighbors know and their employers and coworkers know who they are and say, look, the video speaks for itself. Here's them doing racist shit, violent shit. So like, that's where my research ends. So people are like, are you a journalist? I'm absolutely not a journalist, right? I'm an activist, and research is part of that. So I do a lot of research, but
okay, yeah,
very
that's.
personal.
Thank you for eloquently exclaiming that. Trying to put that all down into 2 words was maybe a little bit confusing. I completely understand why people would be confused by that. So I wanted to clarify. So lots of questions, by the way. So how somebody wants to know, actually 2 or 3 people, I had similar questions. How do you talk to people to get them to change? So if you're really trying to reach out somebody that's onboarding into a very dangerous right-wing movement and you think you can pull them off, what are effective tools in that capacity to talk with them? What are the right words to sort of introduce into the conversation, et cetera?
It's really tough because it really depends on that specific individual and what their history is. I think there's a lot more low-key white supremacy underlying a lot of people's beliefs than folks really want to admit to, even in their own families, right? And so it's dangerous to engage with someone on issues of economic inequality, right, without really engaging very directly with white supremacist beliefs and attitudes. And so like I'm sort of reluctant to give people like general purpose advice. There's a couple of good zines out there, like 40 Ways to Fight Fascism. I think that, you know, it can be helpful to I think that one of the things that has helped me really get to people is to have them come listen to victims of police brutality, have them come listen to AJ Weber's dad, right? Who's out there. Like, if you're not moved by parents of 16-year-old kids who were shot, killed by the police, just minding their own business, then I don't know how to reach you. But I can tell you this, that debating facts and logic with people who have no interest in facts and logic is probably, like, I think it's Sam Harris who has a quote, if someone doesn't value logic, what logical argument could you provide to show the importance of logic, right? Like, it's fascism being an aesthetic, people being caught up in this feeling of belonging and this feeling of unity and this feeling of purpose. And a lot of people who are members of QAnon became members because they're not knitted into their own communities. Like, if we actually frankly look at the way that people are isolated online and the way that the economic sort of system of capitalism that we have here in the US and rising home prices, forces families to move away from each other, right? And so we've got this
Right.
whole stupid concept, and I'm going to get kind of deep on it, but this whole concept of the nuclear family, where people are moving across the country, or they're moving away from, their communities to the burbs because they can't live in the place where they work, and they don't have friends near them, or everything's online and they're isolated, or the way that when someone turns 65, we shuffle them out of public life and just say, you got to go home and just, not participate in life anymore, and you're retired. And there's so much isolation in this country. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people get onboarded into QAnon because they want to be a part of something that's special, and they want to feel like they're the ones that are in the know. And again, I'm not suggesting that we sing Kumbaya or we sit down with fascists and buy them a beer. Like, at the end of the day, what we have to do is, like, first of all, stop the violent extremists who are already organizing in the streets,
Right.
and stop them by any means necessary, because that's the tip of the spear, and that's where people get hurt, right? And that's where people get killed. They get run over with cars, they get shot up, right? So expose those people and shut them down, right? Because those are the future, synagogue shooters, the future mosque
Yeah.
shooters, and stuff, future Capitol stormers, right? So we got to deal with, like, that burning fire first. The broader thing, I mean, I think it's like, we have to find ways to have people engage in a more healthy way, and to be knitted into communities that aren't just specifically online, where everything that's being fed to them is via some algorithm somewhere. And because whoever's willing to exploit that algorithm with money and with time is going to be the one that gets their message out. Honestly, and I'm talking systematic stuff, right, versus saying one particular person's uncle or grandma. But honestly, the death of local media has been a huge issue, right?
Yeah, I
The way
agree.
that Sinclair, like, owns all.
Right.
The fact that local media doesn't really even exist in a strong way, we have to find alternative ways to fund local media. I think you guys do a great job, but there needs to be so much more, because that's a huge part of the problem, right? So, it's, again, if we go back to pre 9/11, if people who are young don't understand, like, we used to have local papers that looked into local
That's
corruption, right? And we used to have, like, strong local media, and people used to not be on things like Facebook all the time. We didn't used to have militarized police in our streets. So I think, like, we got to start looking at some of the stuff that's happened really in the last 20 years and start winding it back. And versus saying, hey, we're going to try to pull individuals out of this mess. Well, the system is cranking out new QAnon supporters faster than we can sort of de-radicalize them. So let's like focus on the system, and then
I see.
in terms of the people in your life, it's really difficult, right? Just understand that they understand that they're being driven mostly by emotion, by fear. They're being manipulated. Understand that you can agree with someone on many things, but that doesn't mean they're your friend. If they're like, and I agree with all this stuff, and by the way, my solution to all this is install Trump as a dictator for life. It's like, that's where we disagree,
That's
right? And a lot of that stuff that was called so-called economic anxiety was just honestly a backlash to America's first black president, right? And people thinking that the country's spinning out of control. So, I don't know, maybe model the fact that people with blue hair who are queer or non-binary or, socialists, like, really aren't the enemy, right? And honestly, I think you see a huge difference with people who traveled outside the U.S. a great deal, and people who haven't, because I've been to some socialist countries that are really, really well run. You get outside the U.S. and you come back and you realize, like, man, there's a lot of things that are so stupid about this country that we get so wrong. Even in these so-called shithole countries that Trump likes to talk shit about, I'm like, man, I'd rather live in a lot of those places for a lot of reasons. I still like this American project and what it could possibly do. We just haven't done it yet, and we got to get there. So I don't know. Maybe it helps.
No, I think that's a really good answer. I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. Somebody wanted to point out, and I agree with this, maybe, I don't know if we said something misleading, that Antifa is a movement and ideology and not an organization. Yes, that is absolutely correct. There is no organization here. So maybe address, Chad, but how you guys get together. I know, like, obviously you communicate with each other, you reach out to each other, you share research, etc. How do those things form?
It's a leaderless movement that's based off of solidarity and shared ideology around a cause. And the main thing is that, like, again, anti-fascism and anti-fascists, they arise out of the community when there's a danger, right? And a lot of people got turned on to that danger over the last few years, seeing things like the Charlottesville attack, seeing the Portland train stabbing, seeing the Poway shooting or the El Paso shooting. people are waking up to the threat of white nationalism and fascism, right? And even more so now after the Capitol attack, right? Like, I think finally people are realizing, oh, and even I think normies who are kind of like, weren't sure how to think about Antifa are realizing how ridiculously overblown this quote unquote threat from Antifa was, right? And so it's a leaderless movement. It is a movement, and people say, well, Antifa is not real. Of course it's real, right? People self-identify as Antifa. They do anti-fascist shit. Some of them are out in the streets, some of them are online, some are both. And you know, it tends to be organized around events and organized around communities, local. So anti-fascism is always local, specific, and flexible, right? And you always defer to what's happening in that specific community. What's the right response to this specific threat in this community at this time? Defer to people who are on the ground, who live in those communities. And I'm on record as saying, like, hey, if you want to show up in Black Bloc and do fuck shit at rallies where families are there who are protesting police brutality and it's in their neighborhood, then you're not doing anti-fascism, right? You're just doing chaos, right? And you got to check in. And I'm not saying that like I really care that much about graffiti and stuff like that, but if you're doing things in Black Bloc in South LA at a rally that you didn't help organize and that you're not involved in, and you're causing this heat to come down from the cops that's going to be there long after you go back home, then you're not really being a good anti-fascist. You're just being a little shit, right? So like I always say, like, stop doing stuff like that. Check in with the local community and see what kind of response that they want.
Yeah,
right?
follow their lead, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not from there, then you know, sort of follow that lead. And so I think, like, again, it's always specific, local, and flexible. And flexible means we'll do whatever. Hopefully, it doesn't require violence, right? Hopefully, we can go and shut shit down, or you know, even things like some of these buses that were like busing some of these extremist 3-person oath keepers to DC, like getting the hotels to kick people out, getting the Airbnb to kick people out, getting the buses to kick people out, right? Saying like, this is dangerous stuff. Right, these people are doing violence in the streets. They're vandalizing black churches. They're beating up black people in the streets of DC. They're going to do even worse shit on January 6th. That's all anti-fascism too, and a lot of that can be done with campaigns and online. And then sometimes you see like a rally where you go, it's 5 idiots out in the middle of nowhere. They're white supremacists, but no one's going to even notice that this thing is happening, and they're not near any pedestrians. So mobile, like this anti-vax stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of like specific, local, and flexible means. I don't know that I want anti-fascists to go and confront people at the Dodger Stadium site, because it's going to draw even more police presence. It's going to cause a backlash where the whole thing is going to get shut down immediately and for more time than it otherwise would. So sometimes you just go, leave it alone, let them have their sad little pathetic rally, right? Monitor it, and if we need some sort of street response, we'll have it. But a lot of the time, the right response is it's a 5-person rally. It's demoralized, you know, just name and shame and leave it alone. Right?
No, it can be, naming and shaming can be effective, let's be honest. I thought, Chad, that this was really an interesting question. Somebody wants to know if Antifa would ever be interested in doing direct democracy or supporting direct democracy in some way.
You know, there's anti-fascists from all political persuasions. Like there's people who are like, you know, fairly liberal, and support kind of the republic form of democracy, and then there's sort of like people who are more like no government, they're not statist, they believe in, you know, anarchist. Yeah, so it's really hard to say. I mean, like to say that Antifa believes anything, like Antifa is such it's so many different people that are involved in anti-fascist activity, and it tends to be fairly fluid, and so it's hard for me to say what Antifa would or wouldn't support, because Antifa by definition can't really support anything other than anti-fascism. It's kind of like what it's all about.
Right. Okay. So also somebody brought up another interesting point, because I did see a lot of Parler videos where people were saying this, and I think Alex Jones was present there on January 6th and tried to make this claim as well. But they were originally trying to blame Antifa for the insurrection, saying that those weren't really Trump people, that they were plants from Antifa. Sure. We know now that that's just patently absurd. But it was a line that was floated by a few of the outlets even. So what is your response to that? Why does Antifa always become the blame, you know?
And it's, you know how I talked about how there's always a marginalized outgroup that is demonized as the enemy of the people, and they're behind the plot against the people, and how that's an intrinsic core of fascism. Whether that's communists, if you think about the Red Scare, whether that's socialists, if you think about Nazi Germany. I've been called a commie I've been called a socialist. I'm kind of neither of those things. And so they're a convenient group to blame and pin things on, right? If they needed another group, they would blame it on the Roma or the
Right.
Jews. In fact, they do. If you think about these George Soros globalist and conspiracy Zionist conspiracy
it,
theories as
yeah.
well as anti-Semitic, they're blaming stuff on the Jews too. So they're going to blame it on whoever they really can. And Antifa just happens to be the name that causes people to feel a certain kind of way.
Right.
And it's complete garbage, by the way. First of all, if Antifa actually did storm the Capitol, they were all worn black and none of them would have got caught.
Well,
I joke with them. I was literally joking with them at the rally. I was like, guys, if you want to learn like how to actually do stuff, like you ought to learn black bloc, right? Because like all you people are catching cases right now and everyone's looking at them like you complete
they made it
idiot.
very easy to for the FBI to find out who they are. Even the Proud Boys did when
sure.
they were
And
trying
by the way,
to
I
cover.
don't think I think that we're going to see a few people catch some serious cases. I think.
Oh, I believe that is absolutely the case. I believe,
people are going to get slaps on the wrist.
Chad, we talked about this at the beginning of the show a little bit, but the fact that they're adding conspiracy to commit charges through the federal indictments, right? So you have the arrest records that were released, the statements of evidence, et cetera, that came out, the DOJ puts out, but then as they start to get their grand jury indictments, you see more of the case coming through, right? So we've now had multiple folks being charged, most of which are Proud Boys, with conspiracy to commit charges. And I know also I've been in the Telegram rooms, and a lot of them are concerned about RICO charges. So it would not surprise me. This is just me spitballing. The FBI has not announced anything in this capacity. However,
look, I don't believe the state has been a reliable partner in doing anti-fascism.
oh,
really.
I agree with you there. They've been part and parcel to the problem.
But if you think about the federal government, oftentimes that's where things have to start, right? And so if you think about the fact that at least one LA sheriff was involved in the storming the Capitol, right?
That's right.
And released a statement on it a month ago today, or a month ago tomorrow maybe. We haven't heard anything about that. Was it 4 or 5 LAPD officers, right? Yeah. Orange County sheriffs have been seen wearing 3%er
3%er patches, yep.
We talked about
Riverside as well.
Riverside and Bianco and those guys. So there's so much corruption at the local level that if you think about the federal government is ultimately like the federal government had to send soldiers down to the post-Civil War South to enforce Reconstruction, right? Federal government, the National Guard had to go into Alabama during like the busing and desegregation stuff. Oftentimes, you're going to see the federal government will come in from time to time and they will do some good things, right?
I don't disagree with that. And in fact, I can let you know that her case is being looked at by FBI civil rights, which is important because the LAPD never filed charges with the DA. So they were not going to go. In fact, when we were there on site, I was really appalled because the LAPD officer basically said you can make a citizen's arrest. And I was standing there with my camera going, hold up. That means that you think there's no probable cause, and that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, you just witnessed a hate crime, which is a felony. If an officer witnesses a felony, they can make an arrest right on the spot.
Right.
Right.
Which is what should have happened.
But then again, the captain is a QAnon supporter, and that guy who told Berlinda to make a citizen's arrest of the people who just committed a felonious hate crime against her, is a Trump supporter.
He's a Trump supporter. Yeah, we know this.
Supports the people who stormed the Capitol, right? And he's faced zero consequences for that, right? And so, yeah, maybe the FBI will do, but then again, fuck the FBI too, right?
No, I know. COINTELPRO is real. Don't get me wrong.
I don't talk to cops.
Yeah,
right?
I feel you. I feel you. But
at the same time, if people get jammed up for doing stupid shit, I'm gonna laugh at them, right? I'm not gonna help you out. You got yourself in that situation, so.
Yeah. Look, the FBI has also stepped in and investigated the LA Sheriff's Department for the gang problems and some other things. The reason Paul Tanaka is behind bars.
Just opened a patterns and practices investigation into LA sheriffs, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think getting the federal government to investigate the cops is
a step forward.
Be good for corruption, right? But ultimately, what happened with that FBI investigation into the LA sheriffs? They jailed a few of the top officials. Yeah. They never really got to the heart of the corruption.
No, because the problem still exists and it hasn't gone away. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah. So the government tends to make most of the things that are humane and will actually really help people. The government tends to make them illegal. Yeah. Right? So that's why I tend to have not a lot of faith And I mean, just even seeing what we had to do to get masks to the Navajo Nation and other stuff during the early days of the pandemic. Like we had to do some stuff where it's like, hey, the county is throwing away crates full of perfectly good N95 masks because they're expired. And we're like, well, let's not do that. Let's go get those crates, right? And Ben's like, well, they're not going to be really happy about that. I'm like, I don't give a fuck, right? and literally putting water in the desert for migrants, people can get arrested for, right? And you see people getting arrested for trying to keep migrant families from dying of thirst in the desert.
It's
right?
awful.
And the government makes that illegal. So I don't have a ton of faith in the government, really.
No, I hear you. I hear you.
Happen. I don't know. I'm not going to rely on the government. Let's put it that way.
I'm not going to rely on the government. I do find it, though, interesting that there is an absolute tension with the FBI and local law enforcement. That much is very clear to me at this point, given the course of events the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think we have, like, focusing on Southern California is really important. You've got, and I can't wait for some of this. I've seen some of the research that you have on some of our local law enforcement, which I can't wait till that comes out. And I think that people would, people really knew how much, like, active white supremacy exists here in Southern California. They'd be shocked. A lot of the Proud Boys that were in downtown LA attacking people are from Bakersfield.
Right.
There was a neo-Nazi with 1488 tattoos murdered Robert Forbes, a black man, a BLM activist in Bakersfield back in May or June.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to actually interview Erica Harris on that.
They gave the guy a cigarette and, like, escorted him home. He never even got arrested. So, and that was just a few months ago. And so, like, people need to understand this stuff is ongoing and it's pretty serious.
Chad, Oildale, that area there, Oildale, and I guess this is a very local conversation, but people should be aware of it across the country. Oildale, which is part of Bakersfield that we're talking about, is a neo-Nazi hive. And, there is, I know, not to get... I found a guy there that works for ICE. That's a DHS agent that's part of the little Nazi group there. So there's all kinds of crossovers here, and it's very concerning, and it clearly grew under Trump, and it's something that's going to take a while to unwind, and it's going to take research, it's going to take exposés, it's going to take media folks being willing to do that. And part of why I don't always talk about these things publicly is because they're not fully baked yet, and I need to make sure when I come out with these stories that they are double sourced, they're accurate, and with a lot of these police officers, I've been doing records requests for their arrest records, etc., because I want to take a look at what they've been doing, whether or not their actions have been personally motivated by their belief systems, which we can all say without equivocation. Of course they have been.
Why did Bakersfield PD give a neo-Nazi murderer of a black man a cigarette, escort him home, and then let him leave the country?
It's disgusting. It's totally inexcusable. Another really good question I wanted to bring to your attention is this. Is it counterproductive to counter-protest, or is it effective? I think this might not seem like an interesting question to some folks, but I think it's interesting for this reason. A lot of times people don't think counter-protesting is effective in changing anything. I think it is, personally, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So, again, anti-fascism is always supposed to be specific, local, and flexible. Specific meaning, what are the specific circumstances at this moment in time with these people in this place, right? Local meaning, defer to the people who live on the ground there. And flexible meaning, you be open to whatever it really takes, like that, as long as it's moral, right? And that includes violence if necessary. So, no, it's not always helpful to counter-protest. In fact, sometimes it's again, you sort of talk to the people. If you think about Tahunga and some of the protests there, let's put it this way. If you were to take a busload of Antifa people, right, which is this fear that people have, and bust them out to Bakersfield and protest out there, what would the point of that be? It would just piss people off and make them feel like their community is being invaded. And these are people from outside the community who don't belong here. It's the thing that they're terrified of, right? Because they think we're going to burn down their cities, right? So, no, it's not.
There's that. No, it's very real. I laugh because it's a thing. You're right.
No, I mean, actually, if you think about Yorba Linda on September 26th, it was a small group of like 30 Black Lives Matter, not even Antifa people, just 30 Black Lives Matter people who wanted to do a peaceful protest in Yorba Linda. They had peacefully protested there before in June and July. Nothing bad ever happened. Someone started a rumor that there's going to be 23 buses of Antifa people coming to Yorba Linda. What ended up happening, right? Hundreds of Proud Boys and other folks, well, I'm going to say hundreds, dozens of Proud Boys certainly hundreds of counter protesters from all over Southern California, including many Proud Boys who we know, came armed with guns and bats and mace.
That's right.
And beat quite a few people up, right? And caused an incident where
this was September 26th?
September 26th, right? And we're beating on Tia's car, and she accelerated out of there. She drove over someone apparently, and they called that an attack. And you kind of go, well, these people thought that this group of 30 young people holding signs was a huge danger to their community, and they brought in all these Proud Boys from all over SoCal and like beat them up while Orange County Sheriff just looked on. Right. And so, no, it's, I think you have to be careful about calling more attention. And by the way, I'm not faulting those organizers. I'm just saying there is a large reactionary force of what we call chuds here in Southern California. And sometimes it's best to just say, I don't know, community leader, what do you think is the best thing to do? Sometimes people say, hey, we want to be able to go out there and exercise our First Amendment rights. We don't want a violent confrontation, but we know that if we don't show up with enough people, that they'll come over to our side and beat us up with their American flags, just like they did at the Capitol. So sometimes you get people say, hey, we'd like some other people just standing there with us in solidarity so that we can say our piece, heckle them from across the street with the megaphone, present an opposite point of view, and ideally do that peacefully. And if you don't do that, then you get what happened in downtown LA, which is like 5 or 6 different people were violently assaulted by Proud Boys who came from Bakersfield, and LAPD let them get away with it, right? And so you can't count on the police to protect you, and sometimes you have to have the community protect itself.
This is true.
So
let's talk about Tatiana Turner for a moment, because I think this is a story that is not well known that maybe should be. We actually, Sean Beckner, Carr Mitchell, and I have actually interviewed Tatiana Turner from jail. I will be releasing this as a podcast episode shortly. But I've been able to find, I was researching the story surrounding that, and I found video taken earlier in the day where one of the Trump supporters, I'm not sure if they were Proud Boy or not, was basically bragging about having a gun on him, having an arm on him. When you look at the instances that led up to what happened, her car was surrounded by this very angry mob. I mean, there's no two ways about that. One of them broke the back window out of her car, smashed it during the melee. And, and I think, she called 911 from inside her car. So I think the panic and the fear was genuine. I don't see
and there's video that we'll be releasing soon. There are Proud Boys there. We know their names and we know who they are, and we have them on video saying "Ooh," the Proud Boy chant, saying "Proud of your boy."
Right, proud of your boy.
We know who these people are, and they have not been named yet, and they will be named, and nothing's going to stop me from naming them. And I have video of them doing things like kicking her car before she even stepped on the gas, right? And you have people on video saying, good luck getting out of here, as they surround her car. That entire incident occurred in the library parking lot, which was on the BLM side, right? And
they came over to the BLM side of the street. That's the other thing. They were looking for a
violent Proud Boys came across the street over there to, interfere with this peaceful rally. And so that all, and Tatiana Turner's been being held on $1 million bail for trying to drive out of there.
She's being held for attempted murder charges. I mean, the Todd Spitzer has thrown the book at her quite literally. This is such an extreme response from the district attorney's office.
We have, and Spitzer's case is going to humiliate him if he actually takes this to trial, because we have a lot of evidence that we have not released yet. We have evidence of the posts leading up to the 26th, where people are saying we need the Proud Boys to come here. We have 23 busloads of Antifa coming to burn down our city. We've talked to the Orange County sheriffs, and they've assured us that they will work with us to push these people out of our city. And
that's fresh information for me, really.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
So so you can see all this stuff in these groups, and all this information is archived, and we know who these people are, right? And then we have the incidents on the day of, where we have retired law enforcement officers talking about, I have guns in my truck if I need them, right? We have people chumming around. We have the sheriffs talking to Proud Boys there at the rally, and we have Proud Boys talking to each other, naming each other, saying all their Proud Boy chants, bragging afterwards about punching people and injuring their hands. And so these people aren't as slick as they think they are, right? And what ended up happening is the Orange County sheriffs did not keep the groups apart. In fact, they basically, and I think that the defense will be able to show this, and there should be a civil rights lawsuit, not just from Tatiana, but from other people who were injured and attacked that day. They deputized the Proud Boys to push these people out of Yorba Linda. And these aren't Yorba Linda people, right? They effectively, right? They effectively, and I don't want to say formally, but they effectively, in the same way that the Kenosha police deputized Kyle Rittenhouse and these other freaking militia folks to quote unquote do policing work, the Orange County sheriffs certainly effectively deputized Proud Boys to push these 30 young, harmless BLM protesters out of their city, and they stood back and watched while all these attacks happened. And the thing with Tatiana happened towards the end of that.
Yeah.
Right? And as a response to her car being surrounded and kicked and attacked. And so, of course, she panicked, right? And we have all the other attacks in between there of them pepper spraying people, of them hitting people, of them holding metal pipes, bats, guns, while the sheriff stood on and watched these people cross a 4-lane highway to go attack them and then push them around the city, right? And so if
in fact, you see in the video chat where they
route,
chased the BLM people down the street, like I was
for an hour.
Yeah.
For an hour while the sheriffs
them.
did nothing.
Ripping up BLM signs. And I think it's important also to mention that this protest was a BLM protest. The people that showed up and were doing this, they were the counter protesters. This was a
counter
planned
protesters, and most of them were not from Yorba Linda. Most of them were from faraway places like Bakersfield, San Diego, and so on. Like I said, we have their names, we have their Proud Boy, we have them yelling Proud Boy chants there at Yorba Linda. We know who they are. Some of them are folks who went to the DC Million MAGA March and marched with the Proud Boys and Proud Boys colors.
Right. And Roger Stone was there present with them.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing, and I think that Spitzer's gonna end up. This probably be the case that ruins his career because all this stuff's gonna come out. So and it's unfortunate because at the end of the day, one of our sisters is in jail, right? He is in prison right now, and it's completely unfair. Like, should there be zero law enforcement? I don't know, right? If you want to make a case, make a case, but you're trying to do $1 million bail for someone?
Yeah, $1 million bail attempted murder is, without looking at the mitigating circumstances, is incredibly extreme. You cannot...
No, it's racist is what
it's racist. Oh, 100%. It's motivated by race. I agree.
It's a political position, and he's doing what his constituents want, so that's unfortunate. But it's corruption and it's white supremacy, and that's unfortunate because he ran on an anti-corruption platform. Yeah. And he's been absolutely terrible, and it's selective and malicious prosecution is what it is, and selective.
I agree.
So many other acts of violence were committed that day and were documented that he's done nothing about, and separately they should be investigated and prosecuted if he's being non-racist, if he's being intellectually honest. Spitzer would look at those too. So yeah.
I don't disagree with any of that. In fact, I was incredibly stunned when he came out with his charges. I was like, my God, are you serious?
Yep.
I mean, maybe we shouldn't be shocked, but I can't believe in 2021, this is the reality that we're still in. It's absolutely grotesque. Yeah. I mean, because if this had been a reverse situation, right? If this had been a reverse situation, I could say without equivocation that the max the person would have been charged with, it was like a white Proud Boy, would be attempted manslaughter. Maybe.
Or nothing, right?
Yeah, or nothing. Or it's self-defense. You're right. Or it's self-defense.
Got given a cigarette and not charged.
Right.
And given a ride home. So it's unfortunate, and we're not done with that. And as long as she's in the clutches of this criminal injustice system, we're going to continue to work on this. We're going to continue to put the pressure on them. We still don't know what happened with the Orange County Sheriff's deputies who were part of the Capitol attack. There were some that's been confirmed. We don't know what happened to the deputy that was wearing a 3% patch. These people don't get disciplined for being a member of the 3%.
No,
they get disciplined for wearing the patch, if anything, right? And so I don't know. Was that sheriff who wore the 3% patch back in June or whatever it was?
And it was over his name badge too.
Yeah, they covered, and so I would like to know: is that person the one who was part of the Capitol attack? Are they one of the Orange County sheriffs who participated in that? Are they one of the Orange County sheriffs who was there in Yorba Linda on that day? Right. These are all pretty relevant pieces of information. I agree. I think the public has a right to know. So
absolutely valid question.
We're not done with that. Yeah.
All right, let's see if there's
I know
any
we're getting
more...
super local on this stuff, but it's important to talk about.
Well, I think it is part, like, okay, so I mean, when you think about California being, the fifth largest economy in the world, I mean, the LA
Yep.
Basin area, there's 10 million people, the city, there's 4 million. And
Counting.
California is always, as you said earlier, is viewed as this really leftist sort of progressive state, and it's not. So I think there's that say that what happens in California kind of sort of spreads out. I think that's, there's maybe a little bit of truth to that, but I do think that the news that happens here locally does have an impact on folks across the country.
For sure.
All right, so what other questions do folks have, if any? I guess I'm not seeing much here. All right, so if folks don't have more questions, Chad, what are your parting thoughts?
I think my parting thoughts are this isn't over, and as you said, Trump was a sort of an outgrowth of this anti-intellectual, sort of populist, proto-fascist movement that started really kind of with the Reagan, and then ultimately morphed into the Tea Party and gave you Sarah Palin and some of these other nut jobs. So we're lucky that Trump was actually really bad at organizing and managing things, because there are other fascists that are out there that are going to run on the same platform and try to tap into that. And and actually, it's one of the things that you really saw in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Hungary, like in the interwar years, is you had people trying to cynically tap into this this sort of proto-fascist movement for votes and for support. And I think people are going to look at Trump's base, and people are going to try to figure out how to go after that. And they might not be Republicans in name.
No, I don't disagree with that. That's a whole voting bloc waiting to be formed.
Our next fascist presidential candidate is probably going to be Tulsi Gabbard, right? It was a whole other thing.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is supported by the RSS, right, which is a fascist movement in India. It's a Hindu nationalist movement that is
Modi.
Yeah, it's the extremist sort of paramilitary arm of the BJP, of the BJP party in India. And Hindu national. If you think about where is fascism and nationalism going to erupt in a mass violence and genocide in the world, India is the most likely place.
India is a trouble hotspot now, even with the farmers protesting.
Oh, for sure. And in fact, I mean, you see Hindu nationalism and the farmers' protests being somewhat linked, right? And in that the Hindu nationalists who run some of the major states in India and who run the national government certainly are obviously against the farmers' protest. But you see this, massive Hindu temple that they're building on the site of a mosque that was destroyed in the sectarian riots of '92. They're pushing this Hindu nationalist line, and Tulsi Gabbard is, in fact, supported by the Hindu nationalists and the fascists in India and the American Sangh here. And she is going to be this, mark my words, she's very smart. She's very
no, I've interviewed her a few times, actually. I will say this, she has definitely become more right-wing as of late. I really sort of...
She's going wherever she finds the support, right? And I think that
that might be the case, I really appreciated her when she was arguing against, when she was a member of the DNC, and she was arguing against the corruption and trying to clean up the corruption within the party. But lately, I mean, she's had some anti-trans stances that I wasn't really happy about.
Yeah, I mean, she's worn the RSS, like the Hindu nationalist scarf.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't know what that was.
And she's not the only one, though, Chad. I mean, Modi has been welcomed by so many members of the Democratic Party, and I have to wonder, including Neera Tanden. I sort of have to wonder, do they not know who this guy is? It's very baffling to me.
I mean, they claim not to, but I mean, Tulsi certainly does.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
She's on
100%.
there, right? And she knows who the American Sangh is and what they're backed by. And again, like, I have no problem with Hindus. I have a lot of Hindu friends, right? But the Hindu nationalists are a different story. And if you read about the history of the RSS and the BJP party and what Modi has done and how they are pushing India towards the brink of communalist and sectarian riots that are going to be worse than what happened in the 90s, it's really scary. And that's, that's frightening to me. And I guess my point is that the next fascist candidate is not going to be an idiot like Trump.
Yeah, they'll be more effective.
Tap into that same populist roots of returning America to its former greatness, and and they're going to look a lot more presentable and be, I think, bigger threat than Trump is.
Well, let me ask you this. because Tulsi's been also very anti-war, anti-imperialism. Do you not see that as being a tension with what you're saying now, or how does that all jive together?
Well, I mean, honestly, fascists are often like American foreign policy has two extremes, right? Complete isolationism or complete imperialism, and we tend to
Okay.
just swing between them, and neither of them is
That's
necessarily
fair.
very healthy. But fascist candidates are often they have a lot of populist positions. At the end of the day, I don't know who started more wars. Who bombed more people overseas? It's a competition between Obama and Trump.
Yeah,
Trump had an
100%.
isolationist streak that appeals to a lot of centrists, right? And appeals to a lot of people. And s- Trump is a nativist and said we should have American jobs in America. All things it's sort of hard to argue with, right? But like then you see the way that it's implemented is the separation of families at the border and all this other stuff. And,
Yeah.
but there are populism is popular for a reason, right? It taps into things that people from all sides of the political spectrum tend to believe in, and that's where you have to be really careful in who you support, because it's like we can all identify those problems, right? But just simply being an isolationist doesn't make you a
That's
champion
right.
of people, right? Because
That's
there's
fair.
a lot of isolationist fascists that are out there, Trump among them.
Oh, 100%. I can't argue the point on any of that. I think you're right. All right. So, everybody's enjoying I'm just looking over to see if there's more questions. Everybody, I think, are enjoying this, but I don't see any other questions. All right. So if you
I want to
have,
leave people with something too. If people
Yeah.
want to read, like, hear more about fascism, there's a YouTube channel called Philosophy Tube by Abigail Thorne, and she's great. She does a video called Philosophy of Anti-Fascism, or the Philosophy of Antifa. It's really worth watching. Philosophy
Okay.
Tube.
somebody is asking right now about free speech, but I will say this: you probably are just coming into the stream. We did address this earlier. We had, in fact, a lengthy conversation about free speech rights. So the person asking that question, you should rewind and listen to all that. I don't want to go through that again. All right, so that's it then, Chad. I wanted to thank you for coming on. I have been wanting to do this with you for a while, as you know. You are very well versed in all of these areas, and I really thought it was important to have the public hear from somebody that's been part of the Antifa movement for a long time, because there's so much disingenuous argumentation and points being made about what Antifa is.
Yeah, sure.
And that just really needs to be clarified, because the work that Antifa does is very beneficial in many ways, starting with the mutual aid, which you mentioned earlier. So it's not
everyday
just
anti-fascism is very boring but very
Yeah.
important, right? And, like it's not people in black bloc. It's like, again, like it's
Yeah.
people just dressed in everyday clothes, helping out the homeless, making hand sanitizer. One of the things that anti-fascists are doing right now, and this is something that I'm working on, is we're organizing in our communities to help elderly people get access to the vaccine, because the way that California has this thing set up to where, like, you make an appointment and it's like this confusing online website and there's 50 million questions you have to answer.
and
You
half
have
the
to
65 and older crowd aren't online. It's very difficult for
and
them.
And especially
Yeah.
if you think about the disadvantaged folks who maybe they don't have internet, or they don't have a computer, or they're trying to do this thing on their phone. And then how are they going to get there? And then you get to the site and it's like, oh, sorry, we ran out of vaccines. You have to now go from here up to Dodger
Right.
Stadium and try to get there by 3 p.m. So we're trying to help organize and drive people to these things. And so, volunteers who have been vaccinated, who live in Los Angeles, who want to help with this, like, again, that's anti-fascism as well. And it's whatever, you don't have to label it. It's just, what are we doing to help our communities stay
Right.
safe and again, specific, local, and flexible. So people are having trouble getting the vaccine who aren't rich white folks who have plenty of time to burn on a Tuesday afternoon to sit in line all day. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to help people do that, right? And again, it's boring, right? But that's a lot
It's
of
important work.
anti-fascism work is boring stuff. Yeah.
It's important
it's-
work.
it's really,
And
really
Chad,
important.
let people know where they can follow you. I know on your Twitter is probably Instagram. What's the best place to keep in touch with
it's
your
just
work?
Twitter's the only real thing that I use. So it's at Chad Loader, ChadLoder on Twitter. Feel free to follow me there. And yeah.
All right.
I can't wait to see so I've seen sneak peeks of some of Tina's research, and I know you're very thorough. You have to be more thorough than I am because you're a journalist and I'm not. But I appreciate the work that you do, and I can't wait till some of this stuff starts coming out, because
Well, I gotta be honest, I really hate being scooped by the FBI.
It's yeah, well, it is what it is, right? Oh, the orange tape thing was a good one. Yeah, you were on that before they were, but they ultimately, I think, are moving forward.
That's
with their
right.
stuff, so
It is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for coming
All
on,
right.
Chad, and everybody
course.
else have a great afternoon.